Hello everyone and welcome back to the Babbling Irons. Today we're going to do a special show. We're going to talk about a potential manager that we should or could be looking at should we let go of David Moyes. Obviously we understand there are pros and short-term options, but we're going to talk around ANGE POSTECOGLOU. Probably pronounced that completely wrong, but ANGE POSTECOGLOU of Celtic, the Australian manager. As you can see on the ticker tape, he has done rather well since he's gone there. It's taken a while to get that implement his change because it was a drastic change for Celtic, but now they're playing some great stuff. So I'm here with Toby. Toby, if you don't follow him on Twitter, you should do. His link will be all over this when we go in. So again, guys, please do follow Toby as well. He's a great guy and he knows his football stuff as well.
You're a great guy. Thanks, Mike.
thanks for being on, and you are going to be our resident expert on ANGE for today. So before we get started, how are you doing?
No, I'm good, mate. I'm really good. It's sadly Hammers are not doing what we need, what we want, and what have you. But that's obviously why we're here and chatting about that, is to try and see what we think we could do for options to try and improve our circumstances and see what we can do. But yeah, he's a fascinating man. And if at the end of this I haven't convinced at least you, Mike, that he's the absolutely perfect person, then I've clearly failed at life and being a fan.
That's fine. I often fail at life when I'm trying to talk about football, but I think that's how football is. So as we kind of obviously let's talk about his journey, and I think if we're going to talk about his journey, you have to talk about the honours in which he's achieved during his time, and it has been pretty impressive, even from his first early steps into management.
He's a winner, is what he does, and I know we joke and hear that sort of comment from Moyes, but this is on a scale that doesn't really even sort of compare for that. If we look at his very, very early days, he was a defender, a central defender in terms of a player. And he originally born in Greece and moved to Australia when he was 5 years old. And that migrant journey is actually decided a lot of the way he does, the dedication he brings to things, and very much a very humble sort of man in the way he approaches stuff. And I mention those because later on that there are things that sort of really tie into that. But when he was he came to and played for South Melbourne for the majority of his time as a playing career. And the reason for that is that South Melbourne had a very strong Greek background. They're called Hellas at Melbourne, or Hellas South Melbourne. And so he is the only person that has been involved in every one of their championships for that. So as a player, he won as a captain when he was 27. And that was actually his final, he played a few games after that, but that was basically his final season, was the championship season when he was the captain. He had been in an earlier championship team when he was very, very young. But he actually had to retire due to a major knee injury, and he retired at 27. And within about 2.5 years, he was already the manager of South Melbourne. And within the first 3 seasons of being a manager, he'd won the league twice. So from the very get-go, it was very clear to see that he was a talented manager. He was very good at working with a group of people and getting the best from them. And as you can see him there, that's when he's won his first cup with South Melbourne. And South Melbourne were a good team. They probably weren't a dominant team, but he started to create a style and a way of playing that really captured people's interest, and players want to play with it. And it set him up to be seen as a very talented manager very, very early on. So we're talking 29-year-old manager already with 2 cups.
A very good start to your career, for sure.
Yeah, and
into how Pep wasn't. I think he was like in his early 30s or mid 30s, and was already winning from the outset with Barcelona B. Yeah,
exactly. And and I know people sit there and say, look, in Australian League and all those sorts of things, and I get it. I get it. The Australian leagues are not at the same strength and all that sort of stuff. But you can only coach the team you've got, and you can only manage the team you've got. And everywhere he goes, he finds a way to make it happen and finds a way to be successful. So what was interesting after South Melbourne was he then left club management, which was a bit of a shock to a lot of people after that sort of level of success locally. He then decided actually it was more important to go and look into youth development. So he went and joined the national youth teams. And so he was managing the under-17 Australian national teams right through to the under-20s. And it really influenced everything he's done ever since, because his ability to work with young players is an absolute hallmark of what he does and what he brings to any club that he's at. And it instilled a belief that young players, no matter where they're at in their development or where they're at in their growth, if you support them, if you give them frameworks to work within, they can be very, very successful quite quickly. And it's something that really underpins his belief in football primarily.
Yeah, exactly. And I know from there, obviously, he then moved on to the full national team as well, where, again, he had a bit of success, didn't he?
Well, he did. I mean, before the national team, and apologies, he went back to the A-League, and the A-League had only just been created a little bit before he started. And the reason I want to talk about this, because the national team stuff is important, it's really important, but his time at Brisbane Roar, that was the first club job he'd taken after doing all the national comps. And with the national junior comps, he'd won everything in Oceania. And to be fair, you're playing New Caledonia and various other countries of high reputation positions for it. But when he was at the Brisbane Roar, they had a series of very senior, very older players. Craig Moore was one, that obviously former Newcastle player, and a range of others. And he very quickly moved on older players and brought in some of those younger players that had been around the under-20s national team and got them involved. And the team he created at Brisbane Roar is honestly the best football I've seen in 15 years of watching Australian football. Jokingly, it was referred to, and it was a joke, despite what some people are going to tell you, it was jokingly referred to as Raw Salona. Because it was very much built on the same ethos and the same similar sort of systems to that of Pep's Barcelona. But it was very focused on technical players through the middle, quick players out wide, and creating opportunities for all of them to flourish. And it was just beautiful to watch, frankly. And they'd go some games where they just destroy teams, and then even in tight finals when you should be, trying to play conservative and trying to, make sure that you get the win, that they were free flowing and just stunning to sort of watch. And he then went to another A-League club after that. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through every one of them. But he, he went to Melbourne Victory, and Melbourne Victory at the time had Harry Kewell, which was his last final, professional club before he retired, and a range of other experienced stars through there. And again, very quickly moved them on, brought in these young key players into very important positions, number 10s, out in the wings, and especially fullbacks for those. And although he didn't end up winning the championship with those, with Raw, he'd won 2 straight championships with them. With the Melbourne Victory, it was a much harder task. It's a bigger club, and a lot of expectation came with that. But he took them from a very, there's no relegation in Australia at the time, but they were basically second bottom, and he took them to third in the first season, and took them to the season after that. And that's when he took the national job. And literally the year that he took the national job, the same team that he built won the championship. And even the manager at the time was his former captain, who thanked Ange for his work and basically said, "This guy set it all up for me. And whilst I've done a great job coaching, and I definitely want to take all the credit, Ange deserves some too for it as well." So, winning is inbuilt in the system, and it's very much a product of a passion and a drive for positive, engaging, quick, dynamic. There's lots of beautiful adjectives you can use to describe his football. It's stunning.
And obviously, when he went to the national team, obviously he won the Asia Cup with Australia, which is obviously a big achievement. Obviously, as you said, in the Asia continent, there are some teams that are weaker, but you do have the likes of South Korea, you do have Japan, so there is also talent in there. So if you are going to win, you have to beat teams that, as we see in the World Cup, are incredibly good technically and in some cases very dynamic, particularly the Japanese team for their size and for a lot of things. They are essentially better better than the sum of their parts. They are incredibly mobile, energetic, and hard working team. So to get to an Asia Cup final and to win with an Australian team who people would have most likely said were underdogs in the tournament compared to those is an incredible achievement.
It's massive, and it's literally Australia's first major piece of silverware, in all honesty. Previously, Australia was playing in Oceania, so you're playing Pacific nations, and there are no programs. There isn't a level of competition that's comparable to what they had in Australia at the time. So to go into Asia was a massive thing, and then to go and host a home Asian Cup final and perform in front of your home nation on a scale that Australia didn't. There was an overconfidence in our country, in all honesty, of going into those sort of competitions that we would just dominate and that we would just blow teams away. And we really didn't understand just how technical teams like South Korea and Japan absolutely were. You could think of it, even Iran will always produce quality players. And we've seen some of those teams in the most recent World Cup show just how good they can be on the world's biggest stage. You could also throw in there teams like Saudi Arabia, for example, which haven't shown the skills in that greatest level. So there is definitely variety in it. No, it's not Europe. No, it's not South America. But there was a fearlessness with the way that Ange approached it, and that was imbued throughout the whole team. Now that team, you're talking about Tim Cahill being one of the key people and a key, goal scorer, and that. Normally, Ange would have a much more, so Ange took over the team just after the likes of Mark Viduka, Harry Kewell, Brett Emerton, and all those sorts of guys all retired, and was really trying to refresh and renew the Australian team. And Tim Cahill was one of his senior figures, but Ange's style often uses a Mark Viduka type, a complete forward sort of striker, and relies on them quite heavily. So, to be able to adapt his style to ensure that someone like a Tim Cahill, who wasn't as quick as he was, but could still hold up the ball, could still influence the game, and scored some incredibly key goals. He, as we've seen in the Premier League, he is a match-winning player and was at his best doing that. So, and Ange managed to get, honestly, the best out of him in the later years of his career.
Yeah, and obviously from there, I know he then went on to Japan, where again, massive success. I went to Yokohama. I believe this is in 2019. I believe this was probably been his last season there, but again, went to another league. This time a completely different country, and they were pretty dominant. I think Yokohama during his time there. So yeah, I don't know.
It was incredible. So he left this national team in a bit of a he threw a tantrum. Basically, effectively, the national team wasn't recognising the achievement that was the Asia Cup, and he didn't feel he was getting the support he wanted, and wanted to build a system to ensure Australia always played very positive, engaging football. So to go to somewhere like Japan, he was the first Australian manager to go there, and to have. So Yokohama at the time, they had just been bought by the City Group. So that's the sort of key connection in terms of his next steps to Celtic. But Japan is a very, very structured football nation, in that players are very familiar with being in one position their entire lives, their entire careers, and never changing. And Ange very quickly realised that not only was he in a gold mine of highly technical, quick, hard-working players, but if he could get them to adapt their mentality and work with them in a flexible way, he could really change the way teams play and the dynamic and the understanding of football across the league. And in his first season, it was really a solidifying job. He got them to 12th. Okay, he was only just starting to build this style and understand the different football culture he was stepping into. And that's something that you do have to recognise. No matter where he's gone, he has found a way to understand the local football culture and connect with it in a very direct and genuine way for it. So Yokohama as a team had never won a piece of silverware in their life. Okay, much the same as Australia. Okay, there are consistent themes throughout his career, and it is always doing something that is unheard of, and taking teams that are unheralded or are underdogs, and just giving them nothing but sheer belief that they will be able to overcome oppositions, no matter their reputation and no matter their quality. Reputation literally means nothing to Ange. He could not care less. He's always really enjoyed going up against the big teams, as many managers do, but he will never, ever, ever sit back, and he will never accept sitting back against those teams as being an acceptable plan, because he does not believe you win games by being on the back foot.
Yeah, and I think Pep Guardiola has been said to be, he would suggest that he is one of the most defensive managers, Pep Guardiola, but that's because he believes you can control and hold the ball, and that's how you defend. So he considers himself a defensive manager because all he wants to do is hold the ball. But essentially, he is playing down his own ability, because it's essentially about suffocating the opposition, because you have the ball for a majority of the game. And when you lose it, you're trying to get it back within 3 to 4 seconds. So you absolutely suffocate and smother. Pretty much is what Ange has done with his career, with his teams. They are about that suffocation, smothering, but we'll get into that in a bit more. Yeah. So let's just fast forward to his current role. He's obviously at Celtic, and last year, again, some success. Ended up with the league title and obviously the Scottish Cup as well. How do you make his time at Celtic? Obviously, his first season didn't go probably as some would have planned, but again, Rangers had a very good season. We have to acknowledge that as well.
We do, and it's really interesting that when I talk about consistent themes for Ange across a lot of his teams, one of them is often it takes a few games for people to settle into his rhythm, settle into his style, and be confident in his expectations. So when he took over Celtic, and I think we played them in a friendly not too long after he joined as well.
4-0, I think, in that game as well. Okaflex also scored.
Yeah, exactly. And what we saw there was a very underconfident team, a team that was being asked to play out from the back consistently, which is an absolute hallmark of Ange's style, and they just were unsure. You talk about Pep comparing himself to being defensive, and Ange is very much built on a Pep model of things, but he's probably riskier. And one of the things he's very happy for is people to take risks at the back, because he believes that provides opportunities further forward. So look, it was very clear that Celtic fans were underwhelmed with his appointment to start off with. That was very clear. And look, understandable, who is this guy coming from the other side of the world, and, what has he done to deserve this? And it was only, all you had to do was scratch that surface a little bit, and you started to see just how much of a serial, trophy winner he is. And so, whilst I understand the skepticism of it, I was very confident that within 5 or 6 games, you would start to see the hallmarks of Ange's game make their way into the team. And although it didn't work out immediately, it wasn't long thereafter. And it's interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more, but if you look at it in a West Ham perspective, let's say he was to come in, right, as the man to replace David Moyes. He's in a situation where this season doesn't mean very much, other than as long as you can survive, right? Well, I suppose, what are we trying to achieve? If we've got a new manager, what are the things that West Ham is trying to achieve in this season? Got to be Premier League survival, obviously. That's the absolute bare minimum. But on top of that, you really need somebody who knows how to try and win a cup. Because we are still in the Europa Conference League. We need to make the most of that competition and that opportunity. And you also need somebody that's going to handle an aging squad, and you need somebody that's going to be able to adjust a style and move away from this low block that West Ham's been living with for the last few seasons under David Moyes. Successful as it's been. Don't want to deny that it has been successful for a couple of seasons, but we're now at a point where it's not, and change is obviously needed. So look, with Ange's time, the Celtic faithful slowly started to connect with him, and he started to connect with the fans in a way that many Celtic managers probably haven't. Definitely not Neil Lennon before him, the only one that probably I think was comparable recently would be Rodgers, of course, and that was mostly due to his continued period of success with them. On top of the style of football they brought.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the style of football is similar in the sense of it is very much about a confident, progressive, and I don't want to say all-out attacks. It's not all-out attack, but it's essentially about incredibly positive outputs when you play football. It's not about how do you restrain your opposition, more as to how do we suffocate the opposition. It's still not how it seems to be. So it's probably a good moment to kind of talk around Ange's playing style. And, in particular, as Celtic is his latest one, it's probably good to talk about that. This is essentially his main team based on, performances this season. The kind of movements you can see there, it is incredibly flexible. Players move all over the place. McGregor is more of a lateral mover, as is O'Reilly a bit, really. Hate is definitely an all-action kind of player. I guess a bit like Mitomi, as we're seeing currently at Brighton, is probably a good example. But again, you can see the Asian influence. He has an Israeli international playing on the right side as well. Juranovic, as many of us have watched in the World Cup, is a quality fullback. But I'm going to stop talking about my observations and I'm going to hand over you, Toby, to kind of talk through essentially how he plays at Celtic and the I guess the dynamic use of those players.
So dynamic is the word. So although positionally, Ange is always, very consistently, I should say, set up in 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1 sort of formation, players are not beholden to the position. They are incredibly focused on ensuring that there is a series of triangles on every phase that is available. So positioning it is a pass and move sort of consistent sort of style, but it is very much about being within distance of people so that should anyone turn over the ball, much like a Pep team, that ability to get very much on a counter press and a gegenpress sort of response is vital. And the pressing is, look, there is intense teams, and we know how intense the City press can be, and we know, comparatively, if you think of all the best teams at the moment, most of them are very, very good presses. Well, Ange's press is beyond suffocating.
It's a bit like Bielsa's in that you sprint to get the ball, and if you're defending, you all sprint back. It's more about high intense sprints and pressing, as opposed to we press very quickly, and if we don't get there, we drop off. It's full throttle as a Gengen press, but I think probably a bit more to the chaotic Bielsa side of things, which isn't chaotic. It's very well organized, but it can appear chaotic.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's why it often takes games for people to settle into that, because whilst they all are intent on doing it all at the same time and working in a systematic way together, it's actually lots of individual movements that make it look chaotic, but are done in such a sequence to effectively trap balls in certain areas and then try and put that pressure and turn it back on them very, very quickly. So classic Ange would be to have, as a central back pairing, he'll have a tall physical defender who is very dominant, Jens, and it's usually the right centre back. There's that sort of style. His left centre back is almost always a ball playing defender. And that is key for where they can then position the fullbacks and other players and the midfield to receive that ball and make sure that those triangle sort of sequences I'm talking about are sort of there. Fullbacks, if you're a fullback under Ange, look, I feel sorry for you, in all honesty. Look, the amount of work you do in a game is just next level. It's very, you can compare very happily to Bielsa's work with fullbacks in terms of, if you look at Alioski when he was there and the amount of just up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and the ability to angle in field rather than just always staying out on the wings is also a key factor.
You very much have to be like a Cancelo type. You have to be comfortable playing on the inside and being in central areas.
Yeah, what's really interesting though is that he doesn't often require or push for the most amazingly well-renowned fullbacks. He's very happy with no-name fullbacks that aren't necessarily well recognised, and it's not that they have to be specifically two-footed. He wants them to be positionally flexible in their mentality more than anything else. Everything else he can train into them is his belief, and he very much heavily focuses on his coaching for that. In midfield, it's all he'll always have one deep lying player, usually a fairly standard an 8 role. Their 8 role has to be a ball playing, comfortable passer who is going to then put the 10 role, if you like, into that space to then create for the forwards. And so those little sequences in around the midfield are very quick, are very controlled, and are very much around just getting one player in behind the midfield of the opposition to then open up forward opportunities for those that are going down the wings and the strikers up ahead. It is usually a one striker with 2 wingers, but the wingers are forwards, well and truly. They're looking to score goals and score goals regularly. They're also they have to work back. That they will not survive if you don't cover and come back. So there's the sequences of passes are key, and there is a rhythm that they look to create. And teams have always tried to beat Ange's teams by breaking up that rhythm. I've got to say, it doesn't happen successfully, consistently, very well. The only times I've seen that done effectively, honestly, was Champions League, and I think that was more a case of the Celtic players struggling with the expectation of stepping up into that level and not being sure of what to expect and not fully trusting the system that's been put for them to create. Because I've seen very, very average Melbourne Victory players tear apart a Manchester United team very comfortably. And sure, everyone got, friendlies and all that sort of stuff. But honestly, there were periods of games in some of these friendlies where the top opposition had no response because the system was working as it should. And it's the system is built to make sure that it is more than the sum of its parts from the individual players.
Yeah, so I guess if people were trying to think of a similar representation of how he plays, I guess, in the league, people will naturally maybe think of Pep, but it's probably more in the lines of a De Zerbi type, where it's there is a lot of faith and a lot of trust put into your backline, and everyone has to be able to play with the ball. Obviously, they have Joe Hart, so he's not necessarily the most amazing. But again, we got to think about the quality of the league. So you can buy the players that you can within that league, but these players within their league are essentially elite players, and therefore is able to obviously do what he does. I think it's also interesting. Obviously, when we talk about the striker we have here, where we're talking about obviously the movement is lateral. He drops deep, creates pockets of space. But that's, as you said as well, he's not bedded or wedded to an incredibly mobile centre forward. The other forward, whose name I am not going to try and pronounce, but their Greek striker who's potentially leaving as well. So he is a traditional centre forward. He will sit. He likes to hold up. He's a bit of a target man, or a deep line centre forward, however you want to define it. But he's much more static than, as we saw, the other option we had there in that lineup. But again, as you say, it's about the movements in and around to create opportunities for him, to give him space in the area, but also, again, to utilise him in which to draw out defenders and then to operate in the half spaces or the spaces that they leave.
And there have been many, many different variety of strikers that Ange has used, as you say. A really interesting one would be, there's a guy called Josh Kennedy, who was an Australian striker. Honestly, very average striker in all, but he had that ability in big games to find a way to rise. He's only about 6'7". And so very much became a focal point. And the thing about Ange, he's never, ever stuck on or a fear of trying to change the game. He's never afraid to adjust the style of play. So there'd be points where if it wasn't working, the system of triangles and systems of putting people in half spaces or just ahead of sort of their opponent, then he wasn't afraid to just get someone to bomb in across. And put in a big tall forward to head it in or put teams under pressure, which, when you're facing some of the Japanese defenders who, might be about 5'8", isn't the worst plan. It's got to be said. So he's always looking for an advantage. I think the most incredible thing I've seen him do would be he played at one point on the Australian national team a 3 central defence, which sounds standard, 2 defensive midfielders, 4 attacking midfielders and wingers with a striker in front. So a 3-2-4-1, which effectively meant 5 attackers at any point, and some of the central defensive midfielders would also make runs. And these guys were just burling up and down the wings constantly, just putting things in and around the box and moving the opposition around. It's a joy to watch, frankly. And that's the lovely thing, is it's just bloody good football to watch.
So I guess this kind of brings us on to our final point here.
Yeah.
If Ange was to come to West Ham, now we appreciate it's probably a long shot, maybe one for the summer, but what would he need in which to succeed at West Ham? Does he have the raw components at West Ham in which to succeed?
Honestly, I don't think he needs much. And I know that sounds odd given how dysfunction, well, not dysfunction, but how separate some parts of it are.
Probably fair to say about us this
week. Dysfunctional. Because if you look at our team, so if we, as I said, in terms of central defence, a big physical, tall right central defender, one who can play on the ball. So if you're thinking Zuma and Aguerd, you're pretty sorted, right? Defensive midfield, Declan Rice or whatever happens to Declan. But Paqueta becomes hugely important in that ability to control play and just keep those angles moving and keep those triangles moving opposition teams around is perfect. I think he'd look for a quicker and probably more direct 10. He has used someone like Aaron Moy, that people might be familiar with comfortably, but he used him in the Paqueta role, not so much in the number 10 role. So I think he would look for somebody just a little bit quicker up there. But Fornals I think he'd very happily use Pablo in that sort of role without a problem. The main issue, I think, becomes fullback. And I know that this is the main issue with a lot of things with West Ham at the moment anyway. And it's not that I think he would. I think I can see him turning Ben Johnson, and I can see him turning Harrison Ashby into top Premier League fullbacks without a problem.
Yeah, I know people will probably say that, Johnson's delivery is terrible, but if you look at it statistically this year, he has a better delivery than Cresswell, than Emerson, than Soufal. It's around about 45 to 50% accuracy compared to the others. So I know a lot of people were really down on Johnson's forward ability, but again, his development has slightly been stunted, I think, with the lack of game time he's got, or consistent game time, when he has been one of our better fullbacks. As you say, with a coach like Ange, who puts so much emphasis on it, it's only gives him the ability or the potential to flourish. He'll either thrive or he will sink. But either way, Ange will make that determination and then would obviously either improve him or decide, actually, I need better and ship him out. And as you say, Ashby could be an answer in that respect.
Very easily. And I think the thing that in Ange's system, Ben Johnson is a very different sort of player. Most of it is going to be quick, short passes, which Ben Johnson's actually very comfortable at for the most part. It's his ability to run with the ball that actually becomes the challenge. The crosses and things, they're definitely inconsistent, but I think a lot of that is also the positions Johnson gets himself into in a current Moyes system. That I think is as much the problem as anything else. And Ashby is definitely much more of a ball runner, and he'd very happily do that. So that would work. But the left back is very much the thing. I don't see Ange really enjoying Emerson, despite his ability to go forward. I don't think he'd see someone that would work hard enough in his system. But I think he would use him to start off with over Cresswell. But I would not be surprised if someone like an Ollie Scarles would get a very early opportunity to prove themselves and a chance to play regular games under someone like an Ange. And that's something that we as fans have been calling out for so long, to get these young guys that we can see have ability and quality a chance. There would be no fear in those.
That's the nice part, isn't it, right? It's that, as you said, he has this predilection to look into the youth academy, to look at younger players, to develop. And I think that's something we've been crying out for years. We are called the Academy of Football. And what manager have we had in recent years, probably bar Pellegrini, who would have been willing to look at a youth system? But obviously Pellegrini, we know what happened there. But again, he played a major and huge role in Declan Rice's career. He moved him from a centre-back to a defensive midfielder. And let's face it, we may not have the same player that we do now if we would have remained keeping him as a centre-back. Pellegrini made that bold choice. We have to credit that. And that was a very good decision for him to do so. So again, like you say, Ange loves to coach and bring through young players. So someone like Ollie Scarles coming through, again, it's that injection of something new, that excitement. Again, same with a player like Mubamba, who, again, another player who is very mobile for his size and likes to get involved. So again, it's another player that you look at, and all of a sudden our youth maybe don't start looking, for greener pastures elsewhere, and actually maybe start thinking, I might get a chance with this manager.
Oh, look, it would. It's fundamentally the core of who we are as a club, and the reality is that Moyes struggles with that identity and with that ethos and understanding, and it's always been my issue. I am very thankful for Moyes. He's built up a lot of systems and done a lot of and earned, quite rightly, a lot of credit. But he's a defensive-minded coach. We are a club that looks for positive football and attacking football. We expect young players to get opportunities, and no matter how well we're doing in the league, young players should be getting those opportunities to play. And so there have always been underlyings of frustrations and difficulty when Moyes doesn't really fit ultimately the core understanding of who we are. So I think it's Ange is built in a way that is, as I said to you before, if we were looking at someone who could steady us, someone who could win us a cup, then Ange ticks a lot of those boxes. But the thing for me that ticks more boxes than anything else, not that this is a box ticking operation, it is in fact that he the ability to change a club's belief in itself, the ability to move on from an experienced team into a younger, flexible, more dynamic team, and to do so.
Let's not forget, that's what we were promised all those years ago. But this Red Bull model that we've still yet to see.
Yeah, and he fits that Red Bull model of understanding very, very comfortably. And he also brings an expectation of himself to win trophies, regardless of whichever team he is coaching, regardless of their standing in the game. He expects to win, and he gives a level of belief to fans. I mean, the level of love that Celtic fans have for Ange now is just the celebrations when they won the league and then went on and win the cup. Were scenes that people hadn't seen for a bloody long time. Having a manager go out and greet the fans outside the stadium and share those moments with them was beautiful. So look, there is a lot to like about him, but it's the journey that he's been on to help him create who he is as a coach. I mean, as I said, he started coaching about 29. He's almost been coaching for 30 years. And he has a hell of a lot to offer. He deserves, in all honesty, an opportunity at the highest levels. The City Group widely talk about him as a world-class manager. That's how they see him. And he has been on shortlists should, Pep or other sort of key figures move. He's very much someone that they like the look of for good reason. And you could see him at a Red Bull very, very comfortably for that. So if we are who we say we are, and if we are looking to achieve the things that we want to, now that we are have a chance with another European Cup. If we could win, have a chance of competing for that cup and really give ourselves a third season in Europe, the impact on us would be huge. And it would also buy someone like Ange time to build in that system and lay that next layer of foundation, if you like, on top of what Moyes has done. And there are a lot of similarities with the sort of personalities that the two would look for, and that they're hardworking and what have you. But Ange's ability to use technical players is far, far, far superior to David Moyes.
Yeah. So if we sum up, obviously Ange is a serial winner. We've seen that throughout his career. Everywhere he's gone, he's ultimately ended up with silverware or vastly improved the team for the next manager. On top of that, he plays some fantastic football. That is completely and utterly the cornerstone of everything. Is essentially what Moyes has is dedication and hard work. It's about honest players running their socks off for 90 minutes. That is the cornerstone of it. But then there is this other element, which is based on this brilliant technical ability, this ability to move and operate in half spaces, to suffocate the opposition in when they're in possession. And then when you're in possession yourselves, this ability to be free flowing and to essentially pull those opposition apart. And as we say, if he was to come to West Ham, there's not a huge amount he arguably needs to change. Fullback is obviously a big problem, but he fundamentally has the midfielders that he needs. Obviously, we understand Declan Rice's position, but again, in the short to medium term, there's also Flynn Downs there. We would obviously I would assume you would look to improve upon Downs, which I think is possible. But again, the fundamentals of the squad, or an Ange squad, is there. It's about adding an extra level of fitness, I would suggest, to operate at his level. And again, it's opening up the team to be flexible, to essentially enjoy and go and play football without fear of losing or making mistakes. It's a thing I remember when I saw from Pep Guardiola, which I think is very much applicable to Ange, in that Pep has said that there's one thing he will not accept, and that is players hiding. He's like, you can go and lose a game, you can make mistakes, you can make a pass and it cannot come off. You can do all of those things, but I will not accept you hide in a game and you do not make yourself available for a pass. And I think that is very much how Ange is.
Yes.
You have to constantly be available. You can make mistakes. You can lose games. We can lose games because we made a mistake, but we made that mistake because we tried to play.
Yes.
And in that is, I think, is also, we saw it with Arteta in the early stages of Arsenal. You had to at least play and you had to run hard. If you lost, you lost. But as long as you were sticking or working to that philosophy, he knew over time, once you get the players in and once they all get settled into it, it could turn into something, which we're seeing now with Arsenal, which is obviously very impressive. So exactly. I think there's always the comment of trust the process, which people may say that maybe we should trust the process with Moyes. But what process are we seeing in terms of our style? There's no change in essentially 3 years, whereas other managers we're seeing, even if it's minuscule, but small little changes, and we don't necessarily see that at the moment. So I think I'm convinced I would take Ange as our manager. I know you are, Toby, but any last words on Ange before we finish up?
Look, anyone that can turn Mile Jedinak into a ball-playing defensive midfielder is doing something right. So, look, I think he brings a humbleness, he brings an expectation, and I think that the hard-working nature of it goes hand in hand with what West Ham fans would hope and expect from anyone. He wants players to go and play with joy, and I think that's something we've been sorely missing from everything we do. And he wants to bring a level of expectation and success wherever he goes. I don't think, if you compare the other managers and things that we're being linked with, that the same can be said. And I think we could be missing a trick, in all honesty, because he will go to a Premier League team, and I was so confident as he would that he'd be a success at Celtic, I'm very confident he'll be a success at the next one. And it's not, a disclaimer, I am Australian, but it has nothing to do with his nationality. It has to do with him as a man. And I think his ability to get people on side, both from fans, from players, from coaches, and bring people into something. He's a grumpy bastard, and he will fight with the board. but he fights with the board for good reasons because he expects transfers done in 3 days. I'm not sure that Sullivan will understand that, but
no, not at all. But I need to bid at least 50% under the asking price first before I can get to a point where I'm willing to go near their asking price. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But look, I think he wouldn't have cost a lot to buy out of Celtic. It's a question of, is he ready to leave Celtic, and is he? I think he has always sought to be in the Premier League. I can see him coming to a club like West Ham and really making a real fist of it. And look, if it's not Ange, then it's got to be somebody who brings a lot of quality to it. And I think mostly he's a quality man who brings a lot of that with him when he comes.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Toby. Again, great talking to you. Great talking about Ange. Again, I think me and you are both convinced that he could be a great manager. Hopefully, we've convinced you guys watching that Ange would be a great solution. We obviously understand there's probably going to be a shorter term view from West Ham, but in the long term, maybe in the summer, this is someone that we could and should be looking at, especially if we want to get our identity back, to be the West Ham of old that we know, to go back to those years where we used to see players play with freedom and creativity and look to try and win, when we used to bring through youth players. Hopefully, this is the direction we take. I think under Noble, this is a direction he will want the club to go into. So when you look in that respect, maybe Moyes' term isn't that long, it doesn't have that much longevity, and the short-term plan is to stay up and then address. But again, hopefully you've liked this video, guys. If you do, please like, subscribe, and all of those wonderful things. If you don't follow us on Twitter, please do follow us. Our link is here. Toby's handle will be all over this as well, so please do follow Toby as well. He's a great guy, knows his football stuff, and as you've seen today, he certainly knows his stuff on Ange as well. So hope you guys have enjoyed it. And one last thing to say, and that is, come on, you Irons.
Come on, you Irons.